Hi friends, so I wanted to do a little short story about something that's happened recently to me, and it's you may have been watching recently, and I mentioned that we've had a sick cat. She's been with us. Her name is Anjushri. She's been with us. That's Alia in the background. She's wearing her little Bird Be Safe collar. No, we don't like to dress up our cats. I'm still getting over my cold that I mentioned I had, first cold since I went to Vietnam in 2012. It's quite strange, but anyway. So Anjushri, we adopted Anjushri. She was a foster actually, and we adopted her because she had about 5 kittens, and we were a foster fail, and we ended up adopting her, and that was in 2004. And she's been incredible, and in the last 5 years she had chronic renal failure, and we were able to every other day give her, hold on, let me turn this around to face the wind. We were able to every other day give her subcutaneous fluids, which only took about 5 or 6 minutes, and she did very well on that for 5 years. We gave her 150 mils of Hartmann solution and underneath the skin, and it only took 5 or 6 minutes, and it went very well for her, and she actually had really good quality of life the last 5 years. So she lived till she was 17, but about 5 days ago, unfortunately her kidneys just completely packed it in, and no amount of Hartmann solution was going to make any difference to rehydrating her. She wasn't really excreting really much in the way of toxins, and so it was just building up, and she was going off her food, and she just didn't look very happy. So that happened in the last few days before we decided to make the very hard call to have her euthanized. And that was very, very difficult after 15 years of having a wonderful friendship sort of with her, a beautiful, joyous being that she was. Anjushri means, it's a Sanskrit name, and it means dear to one's heart, and she definitely was that, dear to our heart. And so that was extremely difficult and very sad. And we thought, oh well, after that sadness, we thought, well, we could spend the next few months feeling very sad, and then adopt a cat from the shelter, and then we thought, well, why wait that long? We know we're going to do it. We may as well just do it now and give some little guy a home, give them a lifelong loving home. So we went out pretty soon after we buried Anjushri, and we adopted this little guy. He's only we actually broke our own rules. We usually don't adopt cats that are younger than 2 years, because any cats over 2 years, usually even over 5, we try to do over 5. Any cats that are over 5, you can or 2, they have a harder time being adopted, unfortunately. And I won't go into what I feel about having cats and dogs and all those as companion animals. They're still viewed as property, and I don't agree with using animals for any reason. I love having cats as family members. I think they're the most fantastic source of joy, and they're just wonderful. I just love them as individuals. They're so fascinating and interesting and loving and all of that. But with all the millions that are being killed in shelters all over the place, and all the ones that are abandoned, like this little guy we adopted, he and his brother, they were 6 months old. His name, the one we adopted, his name is Aoifa, Aoifa, and which means joyful, radiant, beautiful. It's actually a little female name, but we don't care. Cats are genderless in my view. Gender is a construct, and I don't really I'm not really fussed on whether names are male, supposedly male or female. But anyway, Aoifa and his little brother were abandoned at this pizza place in town, outside a pizza place. So that's really sad, and of course that happens. He's probably one of the lucky ones. Some kittens are drowned, some are just dumped in the forest. All sorts of things happen to non-human animals because they're viewed as property and because people just do whatever they want with them. And when they're bored with them, some people, when they're bored with them, they just drop them off at a shelter and then adopt some other animal that's younger. I mean, it's sort of appalling, really, that people view animals, even the ones that we consider family members and that we fetishize, like cats, dogs, etc., view them as property, really, still. And a lot of us view them as family members, and this is the point I want to get at, which is, and I view them as family members, but as I said, I don't believe in domestication of any animal, and they'll never ever be, cats will never go extinct because there are many out there that have been dumped in the forests and etc. Cats were wild before they were domesticated, so there's no worry of that. But I love living with cats, but even if we had the last 2 cats that were not desexed, I still wouldn't allow them to breed because I just think this whole domestication thing is just so cruel and disastrous for any animals, including cats and dogs and others. So anyway, that's my position on it. But what I was going to lead to really about this story was that, you know, when you go into these shelters and everybody's fussing over the young little kittens and they're, you know, they just think they're great, and all these little kittens have names, which is quite different from how we treat the other domesticated animals, which are the animals that end up on our plates, on our backs, on our feet, that are used for entertainment, are used in experiments and so forth. We have often have numbers for animals that are on our plates. Now, why would that be, since they're as sentient as the cats and dogs whom we adopt from these shelters or whatever? And I hope that people, when they do adopt, and I encourage adoption and fostering, I hope if you are looking to get a cat or a dog, that you don't buy, because there are so many millions languishing in shelters. Anyway, but the thing I was getting to was that there are, we have this moral compartmentalization where here we are picking out names for these little animals whom we absolutely love and whom we're devastated about when they die, like Anjushri. It was so incredibly hard. We have names for these animals and we know them well, and we know their little likes and dislikes, and they have totally different personalities, each one of them. Well, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that if we knew all these animals that were on our plates, that are killed by the literally the trillions, that's land and aquatic animals, if we knew them individually, we would realize they all have in a world, they all have likes and dislikes, individual personalities and so forth, just like the animals whom we love and consider family members. So it's interesting, isn't it, how here we are at the shelter and all these animals have these names just like we have names. People see them as different and they're attracted to some because of whatever reason, like little Aoife that we adopted. He was actually just had arrived in the shelter, and we had no intentions of adopting a young cat, a young kitten. He's still a kitten, really, at 6 months. We had no intentions of that, but all the other older cats were actually in pairs. They were siblings. So, and we didn't want to adopt 2 cats. So we sort of thought, well, I guess we're going to have to adopt a younger cat, and that's how we ended up with Aoife. And he was so sweet and just sort of cruisy in a way, but also is incredibly exuberant as kittens are. But all these little guys have names, and people see the individual personalities. You'll see people sitting around waiting for these little guys to come up to them, and they see if they have a connection with them. Well, this is the thing. It's like these animals are all individuals and they have sentience, and when we're around them, we recognize that because they come up to us. There's some that make connections with us and others may not, and it's all sort of, and it's because they have individual personalities, and we can see that, and we look for that because we've actually arbitrarily decided that cats and dogs and animals like that are considered companion animals, we look for that in those animals because we know it's there. We know those traits are there. We know that those animals have personalities and idiosyncrasies and all that sort of thing. But when we look at cows in a field, or we see on TV pigs in a large industrialized farm or whatever, we don't see them as individuals. We see them en masse, and we block, really, any thoughts, because we've been indoctrinated to believe that they're here for us to use. We block that ability to see what's really there, just like we can see with these cats that we are sitting with in a shelter, and we see that they are quite different, all of them. And we know that for a fact because we've lived, if we've ever had a long line of different animals whom we've lived with, we know that they all have different personalities and sentience. And there's no levels of sentience. You either are sentient or you're not. But here we are looking at the TV or looking in the fields, and we see en masse these animals whom we don't think have any sort of individual personalities. We either block it out because it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient because underneath it all, we know they do, but we don't want to acknowledge it because we are using them every single day. We don't want to acknowledge it when we look at this slab of meat on our plate, or some bacon on our plate, or eggs from chickens who are in these awful crowded situations. Even if they're on a so-called free-range situation, they're also crowded. They give them a slight bit more room than, say, battery hens, etc., but they're all really, really stressed. Ammonia is stinking up the air and burning their lungs. There's dead chickens on the floor. Their eggs are taken from them, and they actually have an attachment to eggs, even if they're not fertilized chickens. I'll leave a link to that, what's wrong with backyard eggs. We don't see all these different animal products, the violence behind them, and that behind that violence too are these individuals that have had their lives, they've been enslaved, they've had their young taken from them, that they've been castrated without anesthetic, they've been bullied and abused and so forth, and eventually their life has been cut short by probably a quarter of what they'd normally live, and at the end they end up in the same awful slaughterhouse that, whether they're free range in quotes or in rich cages or whatever, they end up in these awful slaughterhouses, or they're dumped in dumpsters like chickens are. Male chicks are ground up alive in a lot of these farms because they're no use to the egg industry. That's a common practice, just throwing them alive into grinders. Billions of chicks every year are thrown alive into grinders. Male calves are taken away from their mothers from farms, no matter if it's a dairy farm that's in some rural area like here in Tasmania, or if it's in a big industrialized farm. They're taken away and they're killed, usually at a few days old or a week old, or sometimes they're allowed to live a little longer, but basically they're taken away and their mother grieves for days. It's a dreadful thing to watch children being taken away from their mothers. It's just an awful, awful thing, and that happens every single day on dairy farms all over the world. So there's a lot of awful things. I haven't even begun to talk about how awful it is, but in the end, whether it's a wonderful situation, whatever that means, there is no real such thing as a wonderful situation for animals on farms. But even if there was, say if there was some fantastical situation for animals where they weren't killed and they were allowed to live out their lives and so forth, it's still non-consensual. They're still having products taken from them. They're still having their young taken from them. There's no way around it. If you want to have a business, that's what happens. You end up, if animals are not productive, you end their life. If animals are, if you don't need male calves, you end their life. That's how all these farms function. They're businesses. The animal welfare thing is a myth in the end, because even if animal welfare, if applied to humans in most cases, would be considered torture. So, I'd say all cases, because, it's just a myth, this whole animal welfare thing. It's to make us feel better about consuming animal products. So the thing is, though, if it was the most fantastical, wonderful thing, and in the end we stroked their head and sung them to sleep and then slit their throat, it's still awful. Whether, we're still taking their life. Death is a harm, and, we're basically still involved in enslaving sentient animals. And it doesn't matter if they're another species. Species is irrelevant. It's an irrelevant criterion as to whether those animals belong in the moral community. And, they're moral persons, meaning they're not a thing. All of them are moral persons. And it doesn't matter if we don't recognize the sentience of aquatic animals. It doesn't matter that we don't see recognizable emotions and all of that. That's irrelevant. They have their own life. They're sentient. There's no doubt about that. Even scientists say fish are sentient, and we don't have the right to take their life, particularly, and this is a thing that we like to pretend isn't the case, and that is we don't need animal products at all to survive. We can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So why on earth are we all this violence, this 1 trillion plus, 1 to 3 trillion plus land and aquatic animals every year around the globe are being tortured and killed for completely trivial reasons? Why are we doing this when we don't need animal products to survive? And I'm going to show you this meme again. About what animal agriculture does to the planet and what we're doing to the oceans with the fishing that we're doing, which is totally unsustainable, and it's also incredible violence. There's a documentary coming up at some point, Seaspiracy. Check that out on Instagram, the memes that are on Instagram for Seaspiracy. It's incredible, but if you look at the devastation that animal agriculture causes to the planet, I'm going to show you those memes. Please consider it. If we call ourselves any sort of environmentalist, we cannot not be vegan. We must be vegan. If we are not vegan, then we cannot say we are seriously seriously addressing the climate crisis, because it's a major driver of the climate crisis, and not only that, all sorts of other problems. It's actually the single most important thing we can do, according to the largest study to date, the largest scientific study to date. 114 countries, 40,000 farms, from farm to fork, 90% of all the products that we eat. And the conclusion for that largest science study to date was that a vegan diet is the single biggest thing one can do, not only to address the climate crisis, but eutrophication, acidification of the oceans, and all the other horrific things that are happening. It's also addressing world hunger. A huge amount of grain and huge amounts of water resources are used in animal agriculture, something we cannot afford anymore. And if we continue using animal agriculture to feed the planet, it wouldn't be sustainable by 2050. We would not be able to feed the planet. But with a plant-based diet, if you see that second meme I showed you, and I'll show you again, it's the tremendous amount of land that's available after that, and we wouldn't even need all those continents. We'd still be able to feed the planet with what we have already, the available land. So we still have a huge amount of land left. Imagine what a difference that would make to us, to the world, if we did not have animal agriculture. And it's up to you and me. It's up to you and me to become vegan. We don't have to wait for corporations. We don't have to wait for unfettered capitalism to address this. We don't have to wait for any politicians, because it's not going to happen. They're not going to address that. It's up to you and I to do something right now. We can do all the nonviolent civil disobedience. We can join all the different groups to try and pressure governments, etc. But I don't think that they're going to do much. They're going to trim around the edges. They don't care. They're absolutely in their own little universe and think they can wait it out in bunkers when push comes to shove and imminent human extinction happens. So we can do something right now and be vegan. But remember that, these little cats that are in these shelters are no different from these animals on our plates. They're no different. In some countries, people eat cats. In some countries, people eat dogs. Is that worse than eating cows, pigs, chickens, etc.? No, it's not really. The only reason we think it is because we've fetishized certain species. We've arbitrarily selected certain species and decided they're more important, they're morally more important than the species that we are using for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons. Anyway, that's something I'd like to leave you with. We're so thrilled to have Aoife in our family, and we will do our best to make him as happy as we can and give him everything we can. Under the circumstances, it's far from ideal, because Aoife is living in a species of society where we still view cats and dogs as property. And if we weren't vegan, if we didn't care about him as an individual, we could just go, okay, well, after he grows up a bit, well, we've had enough, he's not entertaining anymore, and drop him off at a shelter, or worse. You see, when animals are property and they have you can't have any real rights when you're viewed as property. So, but we will do our best to provide as good a life, as loving a life, as long a life as we can provide for him under the circumstances, under a speciesist world, in a speciesist world. That's why we need a vegan world, so that we can all live in harmony with one another and do our best to not exploit other sentient beings. And when we have that attitude towards non-human animals, that attitude of not wanting to exploit animals, not wanting to, might makes right, and because we can, we exploit. When we have that in our hearts, that will probably transfer to how we treat humans. Because if you care about the smallest animals, if you care about insects and all of that, then you're going to, that attitude is going to transfer to other areas of our life. So the world, hopefully, will become more peaceful and will become more harmonious, and we won't be so obsessed with this whole differences that people are different and that's wrong and we can't tolerate difference. I mean, that's crazy in a world where diversity is what makes this world so incredibly wonderful. So all these different discrimination, speciesism, racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, classism, and so forth, they're all faces of the same ignorance. And where we have one, we will always have all these other ones. So where we have speciesism, we will always have all these other discriminations that cause violence. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click the notifications bell. Please leave comments if you wish. I always enjoy your comments, and thank you so much for watching. Till next time, bye for now.